Welcome to our ongoing series of Game Changers with the Indonesia Economic Forum. We interview individuals who are making a significant impact on the social and economic progress of Indonesia. Today, we are very pleased and very privileged to have with us Mr. Jaspal Sidhu, founder and chairman of the SIS group of schools. Jaspal is indeed a unique individual. At a time when education was not at the forefront of Indonesia's priority list, he set up the SIS school to introduce new education innovations into Indonesia. Jaspal, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Education is the core of a nation's future. Education not only develops a nation's economy and society, but shapes the personality of its youth. It provides the basis of intellectual growth, as well as builds character and values. As such, a good education is more than just an investment, an economic investment. It is an essential input upon which life, development, and ultimately the survival of an individual depends on. Given this context, and given your deep and long experience in the education sector, what are the key factors that are shaping the future of education in Indonesia and the region?
Thank you, Shoaib, for having me here. I've been in Indonesia now for more than 29 years. I've seen Indonesia from the inside. And I've been involved in education for a very long time. I think there will be several factors, essentially four, that will shape Indonesia's education terrain. One is the government itself. What is its view? What are the action plans that it's going to have? On a positive note, President Jokowi's budget in education is very generous. I think it's 20% of the whole budget. That's very encouraging. Now, the big question is how much of that budget will actually shape the current curriculum to be one of 21st century teaching and learning. That's extremely important. Number two, I think, is teachers. In emerging economies like Indonesia, I am not so sure that the teaching profession has enjoyed a high status. And in Singapore, it's different. In fact, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, teachers are drawn from the top 30% of school leavers. In South Korea and Finland, it's drawn from the top 10%.
Now, one of the key issues for teachers, of course, is teacher training. There's been a lot of talk about how there's a lack of teacher training in Indonesia. Do you think that's an issue?
I think it's not the lack of training, Shoaib, it's the kind of training. And to be fair, I think this whole training terrain itself is facing some challenges, because what do you train? How do you train when you don't know what tomorrow is going to look like?
Right.
So I think the teachers and the trainers are going to struggle with this. Indonesia has 55 million students, about 3 million teachers, about 240,000 schools.
Right.
It's the fourth largest education system. I think what is clear is it cannot carry on with what it's doing right now. The World Bank stats show that if you take a whole class time, 75% of the time is spent with the teacher doing most of the talking. That has got to go. So that's quite clear. The whole concept of one question, one answer has got to go. So I think they need to redefine.
So do you see that already happening?
I see that happening. I see that happening in progressive schools, but I think it's going to take time for these things to happen, but it's encouraging.
Right.
And the third factor is technology, and that's a whole big animal altogether, right? Students are far more savvy than teachers. They probably know far more technology or the tools out there. Teachers are struggling. How do you use technology appropriately in class and not use technology to replace the teacher? And lastly, which will shape the education tree, which people don't talk about, is parents. I think they are disconnected here. The millennials are not. They are beginning to get in. I think parents need to be part of the journey, and I hope that they will continue to be part of the journey.
Is the lack of parental involvement, do you think it's a cultural thing, or is it more a systemic thing where in the past schools haven't engaged with parents?
That's an interesting question, right? So if you look at, first of all, look at the stats. The World Bank statistics say about 40% of the parents, this is Indonesia-wide, right? 40% of the parents have only met their school teacher maybe once or maybe never. In fact, 95% have not even volunteered in classroom activities. To be fair, it could be a case of both of them working, right? It could be a case of just distance. It could be a case of language that the schools could be speaking in English and the parents don't understand what's happening. So I think it's a few factors at play, but the responsibility must lie on the schools. How do you engage with the parents? And these are the questions that I ask my own people also. Come up with new ideas. Technology is a great tool for you to engage with parents. But I think if they can crack that little challenge, they're going to see big changes in this country.
Right. That's a very interesting insight. In terms of where the entire education sector is heading, you know, everybody talks about we're in the midst of an industrial revolution, Industry 4.0. You know, everybody talks of edutech. You know, what will the education industry look like in 10 years' time? You know, do you think today's classroom will survive? Whether we will have wall-less classrooms going forward?
I think we are going to see three changes. One, I think learners will have choices. With technology, the students will...
When you say learners, you mean students?
Students. They'll be able to decide what they want to learn. They will be able to decide when they want to learn, where they want to be sitting and learning, and from whom they want to learn. So I think the fact that our students and our learners will get choices is a huge, huge change in the education terrain. Number two, I think learning will be fun and personalized. This whole concept of gamifying education is going to inspire students. It's going to make teaching and learning exciting. I think they're going to see the gamifying of education in one big industry development right there. But I also think that with technology, children can learn at their own pace. The average student will take the time. The one who is better, stronger, I think there's enough of technology to push him further. So it'll be very personalized learning. The third area that education will shift towards will be very project-based. I think schools that don't bring project-based learning into their program, I would say are not progressive. 21st century skills around what I call PACE, P-A-C-E, perseverance, analytical thinking, collaboration and communication, and entrepreneurialism. These skills can only come from project-based teaching, not so much of standing in front of the classroom and lecturing.
Right. So that one-way communication process in education is over.
It has got to stop.
Right.
It has got to stop.
Right. And are you already starting to implement some of these concepts and ideas into your schools?
Our curriculum is Singapore-based. And Singapore is ranked number 1 in OECD PISA ranking, right? So what does that tell you? It's a progressive curriculum. The Singapore government spends billions on R&D. So it's an evolving curriculum. Now, the program that we put into our schools is 21st century based, and we then ensure that we have the right teachers to ensure that they'll be able to execute that.
And as you talk about, education for the future, education, of course, is also a trillion-dollar economy. There are a lot of changes going on in education today. What do you think is going to happen, and how is education going to adapt, to the fourth industrial revolution?
You are right. It is a trillion-dollar economy. So let's address that, right? So McKinsey said that the consulting company McKinsey, that by 2030, Indonesia will see 90 million people entering the consumer class. This will be your very young population, right? And McKinsey also said that with this group coming in, the education industry will be worth 40 billion in Indonesia.
That's a significant.
It's a significant chunk. So in conferences where I speak I talk to impact funds, I talk to development banks, I talk to private equity funds. They said this is the time to come to Indonesia um, you have to invest in education. One, because it is financially lucrative. Number two, you're making impact. The country needs what, 100 million people by 2030, skilled workers. Where are you going to get them? You're only going to get them from the schools, from the education institutes.
And it has to start from the lower levels.
Right? Have to start from the lower. The foundations have to be there. And I worry because sometimes a lot of people go right straight into the upper end education, the vocational. Yeah, you need them quickly. But the whole mindset, the whole cultural change usually comes in the early years. And I think that's what we are strong at. That's what education will move towards. And that's how teacher training should also evolve.
I think you're in an interesting position because you're an educator, you own a school, but you also are a group of schools. I'm sorry, yeah, a group of schools. But you're also a businessman. Yeah. You run the schools. You have to think about how to make schools viable, right? Are you feeling that investor interest in the education system here is heating up, is getting more recognized, the potential opportunities?
I think there's a lot of interest in Indonesia. It's the fourth most populous country in the world. There's a middle class that's coming up. People are interested in education. But with Indonesia, outside the 4-5 biggest cities, the affordability starts dropping. So everyone is packed and cramped in the main cities, right? And it's very competitive. So new players who want to come to education are actually entering in what I call a saturated market. So it becomes an acquisition type opportunity. We feel that the opportunities really exist in Tier B, Tier C cities. And if you understand the SIS model, the most expensive school that I had my children to go, the privilege to go to, was pegged at $25,000 a year a child. Sure, I halved that to 15. I did the Singapore International School. And then I halved 15 to 7. I did several $7,000 schools in Jakarta. I halved 7 to 4. I did a few schools in cities like Medan, Semarang, and Cilegon. And I halved 4,000 to $2,000. We plan to put those $2,000 schools right across the other cities. And the interest is amazing, but people are careful when they come into the smaller cities out there.
Right. But even as you halve the cost of such schools, you maintain the standard of teaching, the standard of education. How do you, that's an interesting challenge.
I think we have to get our mindset away that the lower the fees, the poor, the quality goes down. I think that's not correct. My friend from the World Bank said the best school he saw in Africa was under a tree. So it is about the teacher, less about the facility. So as we reduce the school fees, we look at three things. We look at, are we placing the school in the right catchment area? Is it financially sustainable, scalable? And number three, what's the impact that we create? In terms of where we want to place these schools, we have got a study done. We have laid out the number of cities. I'm very excited. In terms of financially making the schools sustainable and frankly providing fair returns to the investors, sure, the problem always lies in land. How do we factor land in? And here we think work with real estate developers, family officers who got land banks, and even with the government. Why can't I put a school on a government land and say, I'm going to bring 21st century teaching, I'm going to help public school teachers, we're going to form a partnership. So I think PPP needs to sort of mold and change in this country.
Right. That's in a way, it's a paradigm shift in terms of how schools are built and operated. Beyond that, what are the key challenges for educators today?
Again, one is technology. I've repeated this. I'm repeating it. I think educators are really struggling with this technology. They don't know how to use technology. I have gone into schools. They have one projector. They have a smart board, and they think they have technology. They ask the students, okay, now stop, go and look at the video. That's the end of that to them. I think they're struggling to see how that can sort of work with them in the classroom, right? That's one. Number two, they need to redefine the whole value proposition of what they're doing in classrooms. And I go back to this whole thing, right? How do you teach when you don't know what the challenges are there tomorrow? And here I think schools need to work closely with industry. I think if industry CEOs, people out there can come into schools and show teachers what's happening outside, we are going to see a mind shift. So teachers need a mind shift too.
Right. I think that's very interesting, and there has been a lot of discussions about how schools must meet the demand of business, right, of industry. Otherwise, you are producing graduates who are not employable, right? Do you have any interesting ideas or thoughts about how that you can bring industry and employers into the education system?
So I've been thinking about this, right? To just say that school must have a closer working relationship with industry, it's a general statement. I'm an engineer. I need solutions. I need concrete solutions. So I think here are a few ideas that people can think about. One, bring industry players onto your board, your school board. Just not have yesterday's dinosaurs, people with vested interests. Bring in the likes of Makarim, Pandu, this well-known Pandu Sharif. Come on, let them come on their board. I have such people on my board, so they can share with the teachers what's happening out there. And second thing, which is rather may ruffle some feathers, but I'll bring it up anyway. We talk about students doing internships. How about letting teachers do internships? Let a teacher spend a month in Gojek and let her see, my goodness, this is what the industry needs. I need to go back and redo certain things. So I think if the teachers can shift their thinking, we are going to see massive impact today.
That is indeed very interesting because, yeah, like you said, internships are for students but not for teachers.
And nobody thinks about it.
And nobody thinks about it. And I think, like you said, bringing people, business people onto the boards of schools is critical. Because it's their input that will, flow through.
After all, they're going to be the employers, right?
Exactly. They will employ the students, Yeah. And of course, today, in the fast-moving digital world, we talk about digital natives, people who are born with an iPhone or a Samsung next to them, you know what I mean? How do you think, this will impact in education? Primarily because, information today is at your fingertips.
I think whatever you want a child to know, the child can find it Google. They can Google it. So let's just understand that fact. So which means you technically should say, there's nothing for me to teach because the child can actually pick it up from Google, right? So which begs the question, then what do these educators need to do? I feel they need to be less of a teacher, but a bigger mentor. I think they need to help students understand, how do you research? You got that data, how do you analyze? How do you interpret the data? How do you know what's fake news? What's the veracity of that information? How do you make ethical judgments? Google is not going to teach you all this, right? So, and how do you use the problems? How do you use these to creatively solve problems around you? How do you collaborate? I've got something from Google, you've got something. How do we all sit down and collaborate? So I think that's where the educators need to shift, a big shift.
So it's no longer just purveyors of information or providers of information, but really knowledge, right?
It will be a yesterday's school show if the teacher is standing there talking to 40 students and telling them this, that. The guy at the back will be thinking, thank you very much, I've just Googled it yesterday, I know the answer. Yeah.
So then how do teachers prepare themselves for this new coming age,
I've been asked that question in conferences, I've been asked that question by parents, and I think everyone deserves a very clear answer. And that's the engineer name talking, right? In this digital world where teachers and students are, in a way, trying to work together, what is missing is connections. A teacher and a student need to make connections. And only when you connect, you are going to see an improvement in student outcomes. So let's talk about this thing called connection. So I feel a great educator needs, so I've coined this word effector. E-F-F-E-C-T-O-R, effector. You won't find a definition of effector anywhere. Effector means, in my mind, someone who makes a positive effect on someone else's life. So effector, the E for me stands for earnest. The teacher must be genuinely earnest in this profession. Right? When you're earnest, you'll make that connection. The other F is funny. Look, if you're not funny, and you want to walk into a class, people are not going to be levitate towards you. The other F is firm. You got to be firm. These are young kids who are probably going to take control of the class. The other E is enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is contagious. If you're enthusiastic, you're going to get the students out of the classroom. You're going to use technology appropriately. And then C is consistent. You've got to be consistent. You can't have a teacher one day being angry, next day being happy, third day being funny, fourth day being firm. You've got to be consistent. When you're consistent, you are a comfortable person to go to. Timeliness. One of the problems in a country like Indonesia, people don't need timelines. Timeliness. You've got to be open-minded, especially in this world where it's an angry world. Racism is an issue. You've got to be politically correct. So the teacher needs to be open-minded. And lastly, researcher. Things are changing. You got to research. You got to be knowledgeable. So EFFECTOR, effector. I think if you're an effector in a digital world, you make connections.